Music. Dolly Parton has contributed Jolene coat of many colors to the world for almost 60 years, and I Will Always Love You. Songs that not only transform sadness into healing but also penetrate the quietest, most profound recesses of loneliness and revitalize music. Carrying a kind of gentleness that the world seldom spares, she soared from the harsh hills of Tennessee to the music-flaming heights of music history, especially for those who have experienced true struggle. Dolly Parton is more than just the nation's queen. She is the unwavering, steady pulse of the American spirit. A voice that has borne our suffering when we were unable to bear it on our own music and brought it back to us, softened, resilient, and nearly complete. However, that same voice now stands in a different, heavier, closer, and more difficult to ignore stillness at 80. And no one ever wants to ask the question it raises. After a lifetime of storms, can the voice that cured millions still maintain its composure? What is actually happening behind that genius then? When the music stops and the lights go down, what happens? Hold on to this tale, and take a moment to like and leave a heart for a woman who never stopped music, giving hers if her voice has ever helped you get through something you thought you couldn't. Long before anyone had heard of Dolly Parton's name or song, hardship was already there in the cottage. January 19th, 1946, Tennessee, Sevier County. Slipping through the wooden walls after dark, a one-room cabin deep in the Great Smoky Mountains had no running water, no power, and no music defense against winter. The doctor who assisted in her delivery was rewarded with a bag of cornmeal because her family was so impoverished. Later, family members recalled that night as harsh and unpleasant, with the wind blowing through the boards as though the mountains themselves had entered. As the cold gathered outside, her mother, amusedly, held her close beneath a comforter that had been worn thin by too many winters. Poverty did not feel fleeting on those hills. Later on, Dolly would comment that the music had the same effect as the weather. It took over your life and wouldn't go away. The winters were long. The cabin was shaken by the wind until the planks began to groan. She lay under shared blankets with her siblings' music on the coldest mornings, her breath hanging in the air. There were 12 kids living in that tiny home, and often their sole source of warmth was cuddling up to one another at night. She simply recalled those nights years later. There were times when the sole source of heat in the cabin was the breathing of someone next to you. There was little respite throughout the summers. Their skin was stung by river bats, smoke from wood stoves stuck to their clothing and hair, and bare feet scraped on stone. However, those seasons left a lasting impression on her. Music, patience, endurance, and the peculiar capacity to perceive rhythm even amid quiet. The people who kept that frail world together were fashioned by the same adversity. Robert Lee Parton. Music. Her father was illiterate. However, his existence conveyed a peaceful conviction about sacrifice, rising before dawn to farm, haul gravel, or take on any task that could prevent 13 plates from going empty. His hands were rough and music split from labor. Moving through the hut with music-weary dedication, her mother sang while cooking, sewed late into the night, and told stories to lighten the mood. Later on, Dolly claimed that her mother could make nearly nothing seem sufficient. By the age of 6, she was already a caregiver, stirring beans on the stove as smoke burned her eyes, carrying water from the creek, and rocking infants to sleep. That house never spoke in terms of comfort. Love came by perseverance and hard work. Then, in 1955, a silence heavier than poverty was bestowed by the mountains' music. When Dolly's baby brother Larry passed away after just 4 days, she was 9 years old. The cabin briefly contained the delicate breath of a baby. The next, there was an unsettling silence. The family buried him in a plot of ground behind the home without a funeral or music stone. The cabin changed after that day. Her mother would frequently sit still with her hands folded in her lap while listening to music. When her father returned home, he took his time and walked more slowly. Later, Dolly claimed that she had learned to pay special attention to stillness since it occasionally indicated the loss of something valuable. She acknowledged years later that some songs sounded like whispers intended for the brother she hardly had time to get to know. Neither did school provide a haven. Ali used leftover cloth to sew her daughter a coat one winter. Each patch was thoughtfully selected, and each hue was intended to inspire pride. The other kids in the class giggled. It appeared to them to be rags. Dolly saw it as a garment embroidered with her mother's affection. With tears on her face and her chin raised, she made her way home through the chill. That wound never healed. Years later, it turned into a multicolored coat that was heard all across the world, transforming humiliation into compassion. Even after her mother passed away in 2003, she occasionally found it difficult to complete the song music on stage, her voice faltering in places where memories persisted. Gradually, those memories found a home in music that did not destroy her. Before she could properly spell the words, she began creating songs by the age of 7, transforming loneliness into something kinder and hunger into song. On chilly mornings, she warmed herself by singing music, sang along the lengthy commute to school, sang to fill the void left by Larry. She once claimed, "I didn't start writing because I wanted fame. I had to make music in order to exist, so I started writing." Everything that came after was built upon that truth. Every mountain path, every winter wind, and every musical patch her mother sewed onto that garment all contributed to the instrument that was developing inside of her. Comfort was not the source of her voice. It was molded by adversity, honed by grief, and fortified by a refusal to vanish. Dolly Parton's songs would one day convey warmth, grace, generosity, and music. Beneath that light, however, is the mountain survivor who has already discovered the most difficult lesson in life. You have to make beauty out of what's left when the world gives you very little. Because of this, her voice has always conveyed something more profound than memory, melody, endurance, and the echo of icy mountains that were unable to quiet her. Long before anyone could hear Dolly Parton's voice, fate almost buried it. Her first stage was the restless wind blowing over the vast Smoky Music Mountains in the Tennessee hills, not a theater. She sung barefoot against the broad green ridges to creeks, trees, and occasionally only the echo coming back from the hills. Her voice was soft at first, then obstinately unbreakable as it floated through the valleys like smoke. Strangers were already halting in their tracks when they heard her sing by the time she was 10 years old. The power song within that mountain voice startled me. She started traveling with her Uncle Bill Owens in 1956, pursuing radio towers and tiny studios dispersed around Tennessee. With a petrol tank that was rarely full, their vehicle bounced around winding mountain roads. However, the trunk had dreams much bigger than the ridges surrounding them: wax paper sandwiches, music-showered notebooks, and more songs than clothes. Wherever kindness permitted, they slept. Church pews, borrowed couches, and occasionally the backseat of an old Chevy under a starry sky. Later on, Dolly would recall those years with an odd mix of awe and hunger. She described the music as simultaneously sorrowful and thrilling. On other mornings, the air was obscured by their breath and the windows were covered with frost. However, the music that was about to be sung felt cozier than a blanket. It was a life full with dreams, music, and very little else. The instant the mountains could no longer hold her future, resolve became more acute. When music graduated from Sevier County High School in the spring of 1964, there was calm resolve instead of celebration. Music: she had a cardboard music suitcase, a Greyhound bus ticket, and $20 securely folded in her pocket as she stood beside a dirt road before dawn. The Smoky Mountains gradually grew smaller in the mirror behind her as the bus moved away. Dolly subsequently reported that she wondered if she would ever see them again as she watched music then vanish until they appeared to be shadows. From a distance, Nashville shimmered, but the closer she got, the colder it felt. Doors shut swiftly. They made fun of her accent. As quickly as they songs were offered, promises vanished. She frequently sat by the window at night, listening to cars drive through music, rain, and dark streets in a small rented room that she could hardly afford. Compared to the loneliness she had experienced in the mountains, the silence there was heavier. She subsequently said music that there were times when I sung merely to stay alive. She also repeated the silent prayer her mother had once uttered to her on the most difficult nights. Continue music. Just keep moving forward. When success music finally appeared attainable, the pressure increased. She received a contract offer from Monument Records in 1965, but it came with a difficult music requirement. The voice shaped by the Mountains, according to executives, was too raw, too different, and too country. They desired music that was gentler, sweeter, and polished until Tennessee's dust vanished entirely. She sang the songs they put in front of her in the white glare of the studio lights. Baby, have a very happy birthday. She refused to go away though. During the day, she performed in smoky music pubs where tired patrons seldom paid attention. When the electricity went out, she wrote songs by candlelight at night, writing the lyrics on envelopes, receipts, and anything else she could get her hands on. She recalled that sometimes I hummed just to hear something alive. The voice that the world music had attempted to muffle gradually came back during those peaceful times. Put It Off Until Tomorrow, Music, a song she co-wrote with Uncle Bill, reached number 1 in 1966 after being recorded clear's throat by Bill Phillips. The wind changed almost overnight. A fresh query started to circulate across Music Row. Who was Dolly Parton? Defiance responded to the query. Additionally, Hello, I'm Dolly. Her debut album was published in 1967. It was more than just an introduction. It was an identification statement. The truth of the mountain she music came from was conveyed via the songs. Faith, hunger, unwavering optimism. She was still undervalued in Nashville. Music few saw the iron beneath music, the brilliance, while others saw novelty and others smiled. The mountain singer who had formerly sang music to deserted slopes in order to survive was still alive beneath the rhinestones. She would later explain, I didn't come all this way to be told who I am, and she unequivocally demonstrated that in 1973. Music she wrote, I Will Always Adore You, a parting that was both liberating and heartbreaking. The song was more than just music. It was freedom. Rooms became silent when she music sang it, as if each listener's grief was suddenly addressed in her voice. One day, the protracted battle for identity came to a conclusion. The woman who used to sing to Lonely Hills was now completely illuminated, speaking with a voice that no industry could change. And maybe that was Dolly Parton's true miracle. She refused to allow the world define who she music was, not because she became well known. Long before the world saw Dolly Parton's grin on TV, a breaking point was beginning to form in her life. Through the Porter Wagoner Show, her voice had become a weekly presence music in millions of American homes by 1970. She appeared radiant, lively, carefree, and effortless on TV. The price of that accomplishment was that music started to appear off-screen. The atmosphere in the room tightened each time she delivered a song that sounded too honest. Years later, she discreetly acknowledged, I felt like I was standing music in somebody else's shadow. The industry preferred its women agreeable, polished, predictable. Dolly's writing was none of those things. Her rise to national prominence was made possible by Porter Wagoner. However, the same musical collaboration gradually started to feel like a cage closing around her own voice. She owed him a great deal and liked and admired him. However, thankfulness was unable to music stifle the developing truth within her. The decision she had been avoiding became inevitable by 1974. She would walk away from the guy who had helped launch her career and quit the show that made her famous. There was no saying of goodbye. It was sung, I shall cherish you forever. For her, what the outside world perceived as tenderness was actually a melodic wound. She subsequently said, I cried all the way to the top of the charts. When success finally came, it seemed oddly similar to grief. She frequently stood by herself behind the curtain as the cheers subsided. Under the lights, mascara blurred, whispering to music that sometimes it hurts more to be free than to stay. The more independent she became, the more restless she became. Jolene, a song that seemed almost too straightforward to be harmful, had already rocked Nashville a year prior to that farewell. But its shuddering cries pierced the cacophony like lightning through still air. It wasn't just a hit, she stated afterwards. Music, it was a mirror. Mirrors can also show things that people might prefer to keep hidden. Nashville continued to attempt to categorize her using simple terms. A duet partner, music a novelty, a lovely yet shallow voice. The storm that was building beneath the diamonds escaped their notice. She had to deal with cameras and TV lights during the day. She withdrew to lonely hotel rooms at night, where the true struggles took place. Page after page was loaded with lyrics, and the thin walls of music were filled with the stench of cigarette smoke and cold coffee. Her hands were stained with ink and cramped. Occasionally, she fell asleep while the guitar music was still pressed up against her chest. Another day endured after the strings, like silent reminders of music, pressed into her skin. Her body was pushed to the limit in the middle of the 1970s. Interviews, radio promotions, endless touring, and recording song sessions that lasted till dawn. Once as clear as mountain water, the voice became gruff with music fatigue. Corsets dug into hurting ribs, fingers scorched. She discovered how to conceal exhaustion under glitter and giggles. She repeatedly left the stage and collapsed music into the dressing room, leaving the floor covered in sequins. She would laugh music it off when helpers ran to her. "I guess I shone too much tonight." However, the shaking in her hands music revealed the truth that no audience could see when the lights went off. The thing that got her through those years was her refusal. She wrote another tune after being told to rest. She enlarged the route in response to critics' attempts to contain her. She argued, "Even if it means sacrificing my health, peace of mind, and sleep, I won't be reduced to a formula." When Here You Come Again shot to the top of the country charts and entered the pop top 3 in 1977. Music that unwavering determination burst into victory. She was criticized by purists of giving up on country music. Then came 1980 and a restless night on a movie set next to Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. Dolly just grinned and said, "I wasn't leaving country music, I was taking it with me." 9 to 5, a song that became an anthem for millions of working women who refused to be invisible, was born out of exhaustion. The triumph was widely celebrated, but the pace that led up to it was unrelenting. 12-hour filming sessions, nationwide flights, interviews, concerts, and recording sessions piled on top of each other. Some nights on, she said, "I'd look in the mirror and hardly recognize the girl staring back." Beneath the bright smile and towering wigs was a woman subsisting on coffee, prayer, painkillers, and sheer willpower, and still, she kept going. Endurance in the end became her quiet masterpiece. By the mid-1980 seconds, the music industry itself was shifting, trends arriving and fading music like summer storms. Dolly refused to chase them. Instead, she trusted the voice that had carried her out of the smoky music mountains in the first place. Songs like Tennessee Homesick Blues, 1984, and Why'd You Come In Here Looking Like That, 1989, proved she could evolve without music losing herself. "If you chase every trend," she once said, "you disappear in the crowd." By the end of that decade, music stood not merely as a star of country music, but as one of the artists who reshaped music it. The path behind her was carved through sleepless nights, loneliness, aching hands, and years of doubt. She had pushed her body further than most people ever see. Music yet. The spirit inside her never learned how to quit. Somewhere beneath the glitter still lived the barefoot singer who once faced the cold wind of the Smoky Mountains and refused to stop music singing. And perhaps that is the quiet truth behind Dolly Parton's story. Greatness rarely grows out of comfort. It grows from the stubborn courage music to keep singing your own song even when the world is trying to rewrite it. Even the brightest voices can music fall silent when the heart that taught them how to sing is gone. For as long as she could remember, the heartbeat inside her music had always belonged to one person, her mother, Dolly Parton. She was far more than the woman who raised Dolly. Music, she was the quiet source of her strength, the keeper of her gentleness, the unseen music thread woven through every song that later traveled across the world. Long before fame ever arrived, Dolly had been the voice of the mountains' music themselves. The steady hands that turned poverty into dignity and hardship into faith. When she passed away, something music deep inside Dolly seemed to stop moving. To the public, nothing appeared different. The same dazzling smile, the same sparkling gowns beneath bright television lights. But behind that glow, a stillness settled. Dolly later admitted it felt as if the sun had quietly set somewhere inside her heart. She kept touring, kept laughing, kept showing up for crowds because that was the lesson her mama had lived every day. Music, keep going. Give love no matter how heavy life feels. Yet in private, she confessed that for a music long while it felt as though she was simply walking through the days rather than truly living them. Her thoughts would inevitably return to a small miracle her mother had once made out of nearly nothing. Years before, Ali had pieced together a coat from scraps of fabric, patch by patch, prayer by prayer, sewing pride, dignity, and hope into music every piece. Later, that modest coat became Coat of Many Colors, one of Dolly's most beloved songs. Music, her turning childhood embarrassment into a timeless anthem of resilience. However, the song took on a different meaning after her mother passed away. I tried to sing it, Dolly once confided. It was more than a song. It was the hands and voice of my mother. Beneath the stage light, she continued to smile for the audience, but somewhere inside she remained the young child listening for her. Dolly began speaking of her mother, not only with tears, but with reverence. My mama is in every good thing I've ever done, she told audiences, her voice trembling with pride. She shared stories about Ailey's wisdom, the songs she hummed while cooking, the way she could turn a worn apron into comfort, a hymn into healing. Dolly often said she still dreamed of her. And in those dreams, her mother wasn't gone at all. She was simply waiting back home in the mountains. Years later, when Dolly finally returned to perform Coat of Many Colors again, the song music sounded different. To the audience, it remained a story of hope. And to Dolly, it was something far more sacred. Every lyric a quiet prayer, every note music a memory. In those moments, she could almost feel her mother guiding the needle again, mending not just a coat, but the tender places inside her heart. And perhaps that is the quiet truth at the center of Dolly Parton's life. Long after fame, applause, and bright stages fade, the greatest gift she ever carried was the love of a mother who taught her that gentleness is strength, kindness is courage, and that love once given freely never truly disappears. Some connections' music are so quiet and so deep that the world never notices them until the music stops. For Dolly Parton, that bond lived in the gentle harmony she shared with her brother Floyd. Among all the Parton siblings, he was the one who seemed to hear the music in her before she even sang it. Back in Locust Ridge, Tennessee, when their world stretched music no farther than a wooden porch and the Smoky Mountains held their dreams like whispered secrets, the two of them would sit shoulder to shoulder with a battered guitar music and scraps of paper filled with unfinished lyrics. They traded lines the way others traded stories, finishing each other's verses as if they were writing from the same heartbeat. Floyd was never just a brother. He was Dolly's quiet, creative twin. The one who could hear where a melody was going before she finished the thought. And the songs they shaped together carried their childhood inside them. Memories, music stitched into verses the world would later sing. When Rockin' Years climbed to #1 in 1991, it felt less like a career triumph than a small echo of the life they had been writing together since childhood. Floyd's name appeared quietly in the credits of many of her songs, easy for listeners to overlook. But to Dolly, he was everywhere. Music in the turn of a phrase, in the timing of a line, in the silence between notes. Music where the true emotion of a song often lives. Then in December 2018, that lifelong harmony broke. Floyd Parton passed away at the age of 61, taking with him a language Dolly had spoken since the two of them were little. He had a deeper understanding of my heart than others, she once said, and sometimes he knew what I meant before I even said it. That subtle comprehension disappeared along with the music when he was gone. A modest family statement preceded the Partons' intimate funeral in the Tennessee hills. There were no extravagant memorials or broadcast tributes. There were only relatives, grief, and one last music song inside the small chapel. There were no music microphones, no cameras, and no dazzling stage lights. Together, they sung Rocking for years. The music room was filled with shaking voices without any instruments or rehearsal. According to those present, the music sounded brittle and nearly unfinished, with each word bearing the weight of a lifetime. Dolly's voice trembled just before the last line, and you could hear someone sobbing softly in the quiet room. It was the type of singing that only occurs when heartbreak music and memory come together at the same time. When a song becomes farewell instead of music, Dolly seemed to have a silent absence everywhere she went after that day. She continued to write songs, make albums, and perform live while sporting the same kind grin that fans had always adored. However, friends perceived a softer quality in her light, as though a tiny shadow had taken up residence right behind it. Floyd had never been merely an accomplice. Music he had served as a link between her and the barefoot girl who used to sing to the mountains. It was like losing the map that guided her home when she lost him. Sometimes, unable to continue the verse, she would sit by herself with her guitar late at night, her fingers resting on the notes they had previously played together. Music, the harmony lacked a solution, and the chords felt unfinished. Nevertheless, within the quiet, something wholly persisted. Music. Every note Dolly sang carried Floyd, the pulse beneath the music itself, rather than an echo that fades away. Additionally, she occasionally looks up during the short intervals between applause and the next song, seemingly searching for a harmony that the audience is unable to hear. The brother who once completed her songs may still be present someplace beyond the music, because there are songs that never really end. All they do is melt into memory and play silently inside the heart indefinitely. There are griefs that come silently. Silently, they settle down and stay there forever. Dolly Parton experienced that kind of grief when her cherished niece Tiver passed away. T was not the kind of sadness music that could be smoothed under stage lights or transformed into a tune. Beyond that, it descended into the music realm where memories gradually solidify into pain. Tiver was just 36 years old, a time when optimism can still flourish and damaged pieces can still be repaired. However, she passed away before song reached its chorus. Her death occurred in silence, away from the glitter of Dollywood and the thunderous acclaim, rather than in the spotlight of fame or music. It was an overdose, according to later music accounts. It was the last stage of a protracted battle she had been engaged in for years, frequently alone and courageously. Dolly had seen the storm building long before the call that put a stop to it all. She had watched the slow unraveling with helpless love, and family members remember how deeply this loss cut her. Daylight was unable to drive away the shadows that music had been fighting, the loneliness that silently sapped her strength, the tiredness music of caring too much for too long, and custody disputes that depleted her spirit. Dolly, who had dedicated her life to using song to console others, now had to deal with the one suffering she was unable to alleviate. She offered more than simply encouragement. She entered the altercation head-on. She spent $25,000 out of her own cash to send Tabor music to rehab in the hopes that another verse of life would yet be written there. Away from cameras and publicity, "I just wanted her to have another chance," Dolly later remarked quietly. However, the tide never changed. There was never any healing. And it ended the way true heartbreak often does, when the music of that existence finally stopped. After the phone call, the room fell silent. Music, a small group of family members' music gathered in a small chapel for a private farewell. There were no televised memorials or public tributes. With a folded handkerchief shaking in her hands, the woman who had brought happiness to millions sat still. Dolly didn't say much, according to others who were present. As if part of her still music anticipated her entering, she gazed toward the doorway. She was never able to completely avoid the question that dogged her. How could someone who had provided books to millions of people, established music schools, and nourished families be unable to rescue the one person she so desperately loved? For months, she carried that concept with her during recording sessions, long drives, concerts, and the quiet times when songs typically come to life. Tever's existence seemed even more fleeting music than her brief obituary. However, her absence reverberated throughout. The way Dolly's laughter occasionally stuck in her throat, the silence that followed some songs, and the spaces between her sentences all included music. Sometimes, according to friends, she would pause in the middle of a discussion, her eyes sparkling as though she could hear a song that only she could hear. A song that finished before the music found a bridge. Dolly brought with her a reality that was deeply ingrained in her heart as a result of that tragedy. Someone is not always able to be pulled back from the brink by even the most compassionate hands music. Furthermore, fate cannot be changed by even the strongest love. She was not protected by fame. Fortune was unable to fix it. Faith was unable to reverse it. But despite the pain, she found something holy. Refusing to stop loving someone even when the music stops is the ultimate power of love, not always saving them. A life that never music reached its bridge at the age of 36. A song without a last note. Dolly gently acknowledges that sometimes the most difficult aspect of life is realizing that the music ceased before it had a chance to reach its full potential. Some losses don't come with a headline or a funeral. They show up the instant a dream softly passes away within your own body.